Oh, good evening, and welcome to Storytime with Bowmaster. This is the start of a new series that you, the viewing audience, partially asked me to create for this channel. So today, we are going to be reading out of Bow and Arrow Adventures by Dick Palmer. This is one of my personal favorite books. I bought this many years ago on threeriversarchery.com. Very good website. I know I've mentioned it a few times in some of my videos. It's a very short book, as you can tell, but as the title suggests, it is a collection of his personal favorite and reminiscent memories of both hunting and shooting experiences with the bow and arrow. Now, I do feel that a slight warning is needed, since this book does have to do with hunting scenarios. Warning: the following narration may contain scenes and stories that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. With that out of the way, why don't we go ahead and start at the beginning. Let me scoot myself a little bit closer here. So, I will go ahead and read through the introduction and about the author, and then after that, I will go ahead and read through one or two chapters out of this book. If everyone out there enjoys the series, definitely pick it up in the future. So, let's get started. Introduction. Okay, for a second I was afraid my phone was about to fall because of that stinking email. The things we do for views. Introduction. I was encouraged to write this book for many reasons. In life, the primary motivation or incentive to accomplish anything is usually financial reward. In this particular case, my first book, Shooting the Longbow, has been so successful that I then decided to write another. But, as in all things, that was not my only reason. My many years in archery, starting at the age of 4, had instilled in me a long love for the sport. Consequently, I have felt this urge to communicate my feelings to those many thousands who only need their flame rekindled to become one of the legion who have taken up the bow and arrow. In the last few years, there has been a tremendous growth in archery. Hunting has become almost as popular with the bow as it is with the gun. Archery is now once again an Olympic sport. Also, there is a considerable demand for books, articles, television shows, or anything involving the bow and arrow. Probably, its immense appeal stems from the fact that it's part of our heritage and one of one's first inventions. The bow can be enjoyed by all ages, groups, and can be shot quite safely in one's own backyard. My father, who was an avid outdoorsman, was in the habit of keeping written records of his hunting and fishing exploits. This habit I acquired at the early age of 14. Since then, my hunting diary has grown to include this many interesting hunts with the bow and arrow. This book, then, is a chronicle of those many happy and exciting adventures using only the stick, string, and feather. I hope you enjoy reading this book as much as I enjoyed living it. Dick Palmer. Now, copyright of this book, as I'm sure some people are actually interested to know, is 1980. And if you would like to own this book yourself, simply check out threeriversarchery.com. Now, on to about the author. Dick Palmer has been involved in archery since the age of 4, as stated in the introduction. He has been an avid bow hunter since the inception of legalized bow hunting in his home state of New York and neighboring Pennsylvania. For 15 years, he competed in archery tournaments, retiring when the era of gadgetry came into being. While in New York State, he operated a mail order archery business among his other enterprises. In May of 1981, Dick Palmer Archery relocated to Fayetteville, Arkansas. The reasons for moving from New York State were many: the mild climate, 5 months of archery hunting with a 3 deer limit, the need to expand, and the location making his business more centrally located in the country. Dick shoots a 120-pound longbow of his own design and manufacture. For those of you that are unaware, that is actually quite a substantial draw weight for a bow. For any archer, it doesn't matter what time frame you're speaking of. He uses this heavy bow not only for hunting, but also in his practice sessions. He uses heavy 3/8-inch shafts tipped with 160-grain 2-blade broadheads when hunting. This combination, he has found, will penetrate even the heavy bones of the white-tailed deer. To date, close to 30 deer have bitten the dust. In addition to big game hunting, Dick enjoys hunting squirrel and pheasant with his longbow. He has managed to shoot these difficult game species using only the bow and arrow. Using heavy blunts, he has literally knocked pheasants out of the air. Now that in and of itself is actually a fairly interesting feat. Hitting objects while they are moving through the air is already difficult enough with a shotgun. With a bow, that increases the difficulty several-fold. To acquaint the public with the fun of shooting the bow and arrow, Dick does demonstrations and trick shooting shows. He averages about one performance a month. The publicity gained from these shooting exhibitions encourages many new recruits into the ranks of this timeless sport. In recent years, Dick has been writing freelance articles for the archery magazines, relating many of his hunts adventures. Let me try that again. In recent years, Dick has been writing freelance articles for the archery magazines relating many of his hunting adventures. He has also written 2 books on archery, this being his second. In this book, the reader will find many of the more memorable experiences Dick has had in a lifetime of being involved with the bow and arrow. And this next picture I'll show you is Dick putting on an archery demonstration for children at Bentonville, Arkansas Grade School. Now, we have several chapters in this book so far. Aside from introduction and about the author, we also have First Deer, 7-Point Buck, Small Game Hunting, Wild Boar, Pennsylvania Bow Hunters Festival, Whitetail Shangri-La, 2 Deer, 2 Days, 120-pound Longbow KO, and 1979 Centennial Old Timers Tournament. So again, not a terribly long book. But for tonight, let's see. Why don't we go ahead and just start at the beginning with First Deer. For those of you wondering, tonight's beverage of choice is Redemption High Rye Bourbon. It's a new one I just purchased. And at the request of Philip from Daddy and Daughter Broadcasting, I am in my robe with a nice glass of spirits right next to me while I read. If I only had a comfy armchair and a fireplace, it would make it even more serene. But you make do with what you can. So, let us proceed on with First Deer. Again, let me scoot forward just a little bit to make sure that you can hear me properly. You can hear me properly, can you? I know that, let's see, L-Dub is here. Very nice to see you. It's only 8:17, so it's actually still fairly early. Okay, moving along. There's a saying that the first of anything is always the most exciting. After that, routine sets in. Such may be the case with many things in life, yet I feel that anything that is difficult to obtain or achieve can never be routine. It will always have that tremendous excitement attached to it. Hunting with the bow and arrow has always been a terribly challenging sport for me. Even though I have shot over 50. Let me try that again. Even though I have shot over 30 deer to date with the bow, it hasn't gotten any easier or any less enjoyable. It's one sport where hunting and terrain knowledge go hand in hand with good shooting skills. It took me a few years before I learned this, and when I finally did, I started to feel my deer tags. Oh, we have a few more people joining in now. Welcome to Storytime. So far, you actually have not missed too much. I have read through the introduction as well as about the author, and we have just now started First Deer. So, for those of you just now joining, sit back, get a beverage of your choice, and enjoy the story. It was 3:30 in the morning, and Chuck Gush, a hunting buddy, and I were heading for the Montezuma Swamps, a fish and game refuge in upper New York State. It was open for archery hunting on alternate days for a total of 7 days. I had already been to the swamps on 2 previous occasions and had seen plenty of deer, but with no success. I had told Chuck about the refuge, and he expressed enthusiastic interest in going with me. So, we made our arrangements to meet and get an early start. It was about a 2-hour trip from where we lived in Elmira. And that's actually not uncommon here in Colorado either, to be traveling for around 2 to 3 hours to get to a decent hunting location, at least where I live. Some people are lucky and live up in the mountains or out on the plains, so they're much closer to the action, but for me personally, a 2 or 3 hour trek is actually very common. We made a stop for breakfast and arrived at the refuge at around 6:30. No hunting was allowed until 7. Are we back? I saw we lost connection for at around 6:30. No hunting was allowed until 7 a.m., so we stood on the county road with a few other bow hunters chewing the fat until starting time. At 7 sharp, we started into the game refuge, heading for an area I was familiar with. It was a place with a fairly heavy concentration of deer. The area we were entering was rather flat, with fields of waist-high marsh grass and clumps of thickets scattered here and there. Ahead of us was a large cornfield with patches of small woods on both sides. To our right was a canal, and the road we had just left bordering our left side. Across the canal started the marsh. Wheeling above us were hundreds of waterfowl of many different species, coming and going from these vast wetlands. The refuge was an ideal place for deer. It had food, water, and good cover. The fish and game personnel had put in fields of corn and other types of food plots for the deer and the thousands of waterfowl that settle here every year on their annual migrations. Since there had been no gun season here for many years, the deer population had grown to the point where the Game Commission had decided to open up the refuge to bow hunters only. The weather was cold, a few degrees above zero, and the wind was gusting at about 5 to 10 miles an hour. Whew, that sounds like a chilly time. There was a 3 to 4 inch covering of new snow that had fallen the previous day. This made it easier for us to check for fresh deer tracks. Fresh snow is always a bonus when you're up hunting. Chuck and I arrived at the canal where it joins the large cornfields and where we would start our hunt. The waterway divides this part of the game refuge into 2 sections. The section I arrived at was where the cornfields were located. Straight cover, not feeding on the corn. Now, I'm going to pause there for a moment and show you the next 2 military service and was practicing for my first upcoming New York State archery season, followed by a picture of Dick with his first deer. That almost looks like a recurve that he's shooting instead of a longbow. Moving along. On the other side of the canal were large savannas of endless marsh grass. This large treeless plain was bounded by the 4-lane highway on one side and by watery marshes on the other. The large watery Everglades abounded in thousands of waterfowl of all descriptions. The refuge personnel had moved swatches The refuge personnel had mowed swatches about 25 yards wide by hundreds of yards long and planted the succulent grasses so loved by the deer. These occurred about every quarter mile and spots to find deer feeding at almost any time of day. Hello, and welcome to the stream. I am currently reading Bow and Arrow Adventure by Dick Palmer. We are currently in the first chapter of the book, which is him retelling the tale of how he got his first deer. Chuck wanted to hunt the cornfields, so I elected to hunt the other side of the waterway. In order for me to cross the canal, I had to go about a mile to where the highway fence went across. By holding onto the fence and putting the toes of my boots, once I arrived on the other side and regained my breath, I immediately started to hunt, as deer could be anywhere. Sounds like that would be quite the workout, doesn't it? I had been moving along slowly and looking ahead in the waist-high grass for the first sign of deer. Usually their ears, or a big deer's entire head, might be sticking up above the height of the grass. Finally, I spotted one, just the ears, sticking above the undulating strands of swamp grass. As the top of the animal's head moved, I tried to place the location of its body. Finally, I hit a spot in the grass where it thinned slightly, showing me part of its head. Quickly drawing the longbow back, I let fly. The arrow disappeared in the grass, and suddenly there was a great commotion, and then all was quiet. I nocked another arrow and moved to the spot where I had seen the deer. Nothing. After about 20 minutes, I finally found my hunting arrow buried under the heavy marsh grass. That was a bit of a tongue twister. On either the arrow or anywhere on the ground. I had either overshot or undershot, missing the deer completely. Now, I did see another comment on here. If I had a velvet robe, trust me, I'd be wearing it. And as far as the glass is concerned, today, I'm enjoying Redemption High Rye Bourbon. Believe me, as soon as I can get myself a good robe, I will gladly buy one. But for now, this is what I have. So, cheers, Aaron. Hope you're all enjoying the story so far. And I actually need a little bit of water to wet my whistle again. Satin or silk would be sexy. Well, the only thing I have close enough to that is, funny enough, an old black graduation gown, which, in my opinion, looks kind of like a boxer's robe, only it doesn't actually open up in the front. Now, let us continue. Of course, if I go to start reading, it buffers out a moment. Moving ahead, I arrived at some and decided to work my way around. I had just gotten to the other side when pandemonium broke out. Deer were jumping up and taking off in all directions. Quickly, I led one that was running a tight turn to my left and released to see my arrow whiz a couple of feet behind it. Hurriedly, I nocked another arrow and had a 40-yard shot going away at a big doe. This time, the arrow went over her head. When everything had quieted down, and I had caught my breath from the excitement, I went to look for my arrows. Fat chance of finding them in this snow and high grass. So, after looking for a while, I gave up. I slowly made my way down to the first mowed food plot and very carefully crawled up to it. Sticking my head out carefully, I looked first towards the marsh and saw nothing, then turned the other way and voila! Not 80 yards away, there were 3 deer contentedly munching on breakfast. I planned my attack strategy carefully. I would circle until I felt I was abreast, then a long, careful crawl until I was to the open swath, and then I should have a good, close shot. Well, I did this, and upon reaching the open food plot and looking both ways on the long, open strip, no deer. Somehow they had seen the grass moving above me, or possibly they had heard me, even though I had been extremely careful. The wind had been in my favor, so they didn't wind me. Sometimes I think the willy whitetail have a sixth sense that alerts them to danger. Sometimes it honestly feels like that. Looking ahead, oh, hello, fair enough. I actually just had to get a new battery put into my phone today. That cost me a nice $40. But this one is holding a charge a heck of a lot better than my old battery, so yay for me. Hopefully you can get your phone sorted out pretty soon too. Excuse me. Let's see. Moving ahead, I arrived at some dense thickets and decided to work my way around. I had just gotten to... Oh, wait a minute. I'd already part, haven't I? Whoops. I decided to follow their tracks and see if I could catch up and possibly get a shot. I started out in hot pursuit and kept looking ahead over the high grass for some telltale sign of the quarry I was following. I'd been following the tracks for about half an hour and would come upon places where they would mill around before lining out for the canal. I figured they were spotting me as I was following them. Obviously, they must have been very easy to do. I must have been as visible as if I had been waving a flag above that waist-high grass. Finally, about 100 yards away, I spotted them running. There were 3 does, 2 small and 1 large. When I got to where I had last seen them, I saw I was back at the canal bank and that the deer had crossed over on the ice. I thought, well, if they could do it, I should be able to also. With the cold weather, the ice was probably plenty thick enough to hold a man's weight. Carefully, I got out on the ice, making sure I stayed in the deer's tracks, and started across. The world's... Well, let me go ahead and read through the comments real quick. Been trying to comment forever since the live stream started. Hello, Tessa Calloway. Nice to see you here. Stay educated. I might steal that and start saying that for part of my outro. All right. I had only gone about 6 feet when my world suddenly dropped out from beneath me. Plunging to my waist in the icy water and desperate for fear I might drown, I lunged for the shore, my body breaking the jagged shore with the force of my terror. Crawling out on shore, my wet clothes froze instantly solid. Quickly, I took off my rubber boots and emptied the water from them. Then I took off my 2 pair of socks, wrung them out well, and put them back on. I tried to squeeze as much water from my clothes as I could, as the cold was fast becoming unbearable. I thought, now I've got about a mile to walk before I reach the fence, then cross over and look for Chuck. As these thoughts were running through my mind, I noticed movement on the other side of the canal about 100 yards up from me. Gosh, it was 2 deer, and they were loping down the shoreline towards me. All at once, the cold, the wetness, all forgotten. I was once again the hunter, dropping to my knees in the high grass and bending down the stems in front of me to give me a clear view. I waited. Let's see. Hello, Zomblue. Nice to see you here. I donate that to you. Next time it will cost you. Okay, I'm not sure what to comment on that one. Closer and closer they came, maintaining that easygoing style of slow, graceful running. The big doe was in the lead, and I could see her breath turn to vapor with every exhalation in the frigid air. I drew my bow up and canted it slightly so the lower limb would clear the ground, and figured how much to lead on this 35-yard shot. Just before she came abreast of me, I released the heavy hunting shaft. The arrow sliced the air clean, and with the slightest arc, struck the lead deer just behind its right shoulder and below center. The big doe stopped abruptly and wheeled around, then headed back the way she had come with the smaller doe in tow. My mind was filled with the incredible excitement of the moment. It's hard to describe the elation I felt at that point, to have finally mortally hit a deer with an arrow. It's almost as if I couldn't have believed the feat possible until that moment. My frozen lower extremities all but forgotten, There I stood as the deer disappeared from my view. I was jumping up and down with joy, yelling, "Chuck! Chuck! I got him!" My screams were probably loud enough to have raised the dead because only a few minutes left before Chuck appeared on the opposite bank, panting for breath as if he had been running. In a very incoherent way, I explained what had happened and said I would run up to the fence and cross over and come down the other side and meet up with him shortly. It seemed that it was only a few minutes, but it must have taken me at least 20 minutes to run up, cross the fence, and run back where I found Chuck studying the blood trail. We immediately started following it. As we progressed, the blood sign grew heavier, reassuring me that my deer would be laying somewhere up ahead. Finally, we reached the point where I had last observed the deer. Before I had lost sight of them, we found the blood trail. Whoa, I got ahead of myself a moment there. Let me restart that. Finally, we reached the point where I had last observed the deer before I had lost sight of them. We found the blood trail now starting up the canal embankment. Climbing up on top, there, to my greatest joy, was my deer. She was lying there dead in a large pool of blood. The feeling of happiness and yet sorrow for this wonderful creature that I had suffered for filled me at that moment. She was a fine animal in her prime. I field dressed her, and Chuck and I dragged her back to the car. Since I was cold and wet, we headed home, happy in the fact there was venison. Chuck still had the rest of the season to hunt, but for me, I had finally done what had seemed impossible. I had shot and killed a deer with the bow and arrow. This book sounds a little sexual. I don't particularly see how this book could be sexual. It's about hunting, my friend. I'm sitting in my car at Cracker Barrel restaurant waiting for my sister to get off work. She's supposed to be off at 9 o'clock, and it's 9:33. Well, if they have a busy night, I can definitely understand why it may be taking her a little longer to get off. But in reality, it's not. Indeed. You're saying my book is slightly sexual when you're talking about saving your back hair to make clothes for children? This is just getting weird. Keep going. Are you talking to me reading, or are you talking about the conversation between Aaron and Zomblu? Hello, everyday Canadian. Nice to see you here. Oh my goodness, I have really gotten a lot of this. Getting on my knees, pulling out my shaft. Did I actually read that? I never read that. Stop putting words in my mouth. Just subbed. Nice. Very happy to hear it. So that was the first chapter out of this book. Now, would you guys like to hear one more chapter before we wrap it up tonight? Okay, that one's not too long. Yes. Well, I suppose this ought to be a bit better for the people who have just recently shown up, because now you get to hear a story in full instead of having to wait until post. So, in that case, why don't we go ahead and read 7 Point Buck, which is chapter 2. In October of 1968, I shot my largest buck using only the bow and arrow. This fortunate event took place on some farmland overlooking the small hamlet of Facet, Pennsylvania. We all need to play Cards Against Humanity in a Google Hangout session. That sounds amazing. Early in the season, I had gotten permission from the property owner to hunt on his land. The terrain I was going to hunt consisted of mainly corn and hayfields, giving way to woods on the steep slopes. I had spotted deer grazing on the cut-over fields in the late afternoons and figured this would be a good place to hunt. It was easy to get to from where I was living, just across the state line in New York State. It took me about 30 minutes from my place of work to get here. By the time I would arrive, I'd have a good hour or two of primary. Bleh. I got ahead of myself there again. By the time I would arrive, I'd have a good hour or 2 hours of prime hunting. There were some afternoons I would get there to find deer already in the freshly cut fields. They were feeding on the new shoots of grass that had come up. I had managed to get a few shots, but none had connected. I hadn't been able to stalk quite close enough because of the inadequate cover in the open fields. One day, I had managed to crawl up to one of the diversion ditches and had taken a couple of 40 to 50-yard shots. They came close, but close misses only count in horseshoes, or hand grenades, depending on who you talk to. I arrived a little earlier one afternoon and decided to change my tree stand to a different location. I found a nice tree and placed my stand about 15 feet up. This put me midway between the corner of the woods and where the tree line jutted out into the field. This was the third spot I'd located my stand. The deer had quickly gotten wise to my other two locations. I was comfortably situated in the stand and had been sitting for about an hour. It was a warm fall day, what I like to refer to as an Indian summer day. I'd been seeing squirrels scampering for acorns in the woods behind me, and I'd even had a chance for one good close shot. But I thought better of it. Sometimes that's all it takes to spook a deer off. So I'd restrained myself and just sat there and enjoyed their antics. All at once, out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a large deer heading my way. He had just come through the hedgerow, separating the two fields. He was a magnificent-looking animal, and the rack he was sporting looked to be 7 or 8 points. As he neared me, I noted the haughty stride and that he carried his antlers with pride and with dignity. His bearing was regal, as if he knew that he was the king of this neighborhood. As he approached, I could see he had a muscular grace that belied his huge bulk. His neck was swollen to an enormous size, and I knew he was in rut. As he drew nearer yet, I could see with what caution he was scrutinizing the area ahead. Finally, when he was about 40 yards away, he stopped. He turned his head in my direction, and I felt his eyes riveted on me. I was wearing camouflage clothing, but I had Darn it! I don't know where that cut off, so... I was wearing camouflage clothing, but I had neglected to use any camo coloring on my face or hands. It proved to me once again how keen the eyes are of the whitetail. Not to mention their incredible hearing as well. I sat motionless, frozen, not even blinking an eye. How long the staring contest... This darn thing is starting to buffer, apparently. I was holding it slightly away from me in preparation to shoot, and even though it only weighed about 2 pounds, it began to feel like 50. My arm began to tremble, and my eyes started to water when, with a flip of his tail, he bent his head to feed. I breathed a sigh of relief as I slowly brought my aching arm back down. After a moment's rest, I brought my bow back up, took careful aim, and released. In a split second, the arrow was there, striking him just below the shoulder and slightly below center. He quickly turned and was galvanized into action by the barbed shaft biting his innards. Running low to the ground, like a racehorse, he tore off for the hedgerow. Now, from what you were saying earlier, Aaron, that might possibly sound a little bit sexual. I could hear the aluminum arrow clattering against the tree trunks as he ran through the barrier of small hardwoods. Momentarily, he disappeared from sight, to reappear once again on the other side of the hedge. From my high vantage point, I could see him in the next field over, still on a dead run, headed for the sanctuary of the lower woods. I climbed out of my tree, bringing my stand down with me. I knew I'd made a good hit, and figured I would take my gear back to the car, and then go look for my buck. Having left all my equipment at the vehicle except for my knife, I headed for the spot in the field where I had last seen my deer. Arrived at the approximate spot I had last seen him, I started looking around for blood sign. Not finding any, I went in the general direction I had last seen him headed. I walked down through the field and got to the edge of the woods and still hadn't found any blood sign. I figured I had easily covered 300 yards by now. With the hit I had made on him, I knew he had to be dead by now. I was puzzled as to which way to look at this point. I decided to play a hunch and headed along the edge of the woods. I got no more than a few feet when I started seeing traces of blood. I figured he had stopped running here and started to walk. The blood trail now took me into the woods at a gradual downhill angle. The blood, the blood trail was so heavy that it lay in pools, and I knew he couldn't be very far ahead with losing that much bodily fluid. The slope I was going down started to get steeper, and the woods were getting much more dense. I figured, like any sorely wounded animal, he was heading for his lair. It was probably someplace where it was very thick and impenetrable. Or, then again, it was possible he might be heading for water. I have found in the past, when deer are severely wounded, they sometimes make a beeline for water. There they'll lie in a soothing coolness until they either recover sufficiently or expire there. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple more pictures. Buck was so big I could barely get him in the trunk of the Volkswagen. And the next picture says, "This was my first big buck and I was extremely proud of him." And with a buck that size, I am not surprised. That is quite a trophy. I had traveled only a short ways downhill when ahead of me I spotted my buck. He was lying face down. He was lying there facing downhill. As I approached, I could see he was a beautiful specimen, in the prime of his adulthood, and a twist of fate had suddenly brought him to a quick and honorable death. It was sad in a way that such a noble creature should be brought to an ignominious end, but this was the way of nature. Man the hunter had prevailed over a wild beast once again. In testing him out, I discovered my broadhead arrow had penetrated the liver. This accounted for the tremendous bleeding after he had once stopped running. He had a beautiful set of antlers, and I counted 7 long points. I estimated his live weight to be around 150 pounds. I started to drag him upfield, but found I could only pull him a few feet before having to stop and rest. I had quite a ways to go to get back to the car, and at this rate, I was never going to make it. He was just too big and heavy, and the friction created by the dry ground made it difficult to slide him, especially going up a steep incline. I returned to Elmira and got one of my employees to come back with me. Darkness had already set in, and when we got back, but with the aid of the flashlights, we managed to find him. In short order, the two of us were able to drag him back up the steep hill to the car. I had the head mounted, and as I write this story, he looks down on me, bringing back this wonderful remembrance as if 14 years ago was only yesterday. So, that's the end of that chapter, and let me go ahead and read through a few more of these comments, since I definitely didn't read through very many of them when I was reading. Okay, here we go. And do the cards in funny voices. Absolutely. Zomblu can sound like Kermit the Frog. That's an impression I have not tried in quite a while, actually. Darts and Ka? What? Add some Bean Boozled into that mix. L-Dub senses are tingling. Barbed Shaft biting his innards. Yes, I had a feeling you would enjoy hearing that one. Yes, hello, I am here working. Sounds like a murder mystery. Fair enough. I mean, honestly, Dick Palmer is a pretty gifted writer. Very thick and impenetrable. I kind of feel bad for the deer. True enough, but that is the nature of hunting, sadly. Someone should call Dr. Bees. I'm not sure who that is. My first big buck. I've heard deer liver is quite tasty, but I have not gotten to try it yet. Don't make me hit you with a newspaper. It's a trap. Oh, Cards Against Humanity. Okay, now I see what you're going on. It's been a while since I've done that much consecutive talking in a live stream without any kind of breaks in between, so I can definitely see why Beast needs so much fluids while he's doing his live streams, especially since he does live streams for like 2 hours. And that's a very good question. How was everyone's day today? Mine was busy and expensive. So, as far as this book is concerned, we still have 7 chapters left in it. If you would like to hear more chapters out of this book, simply let me know down in the comments below, or comments right now, of course. If you want to hear a different book for the next episode of Storytime, again, also let me more. Darn it, Some Blue! Right as your comment came up, it changed my train of thought. Excuse me a moment. Okay, where were we? Mine was spent dreaming about a better job. I know how that feels. But I like eating meat. I don't like knowing how it got there. I think they butcher cows a little bit differently than they do wild game. Just being honest. Let's see. Now I just saw 6 squad cars speeding down the interstate after 2 sports cars went speeding down it. Wow. He's good at changing thought trains. I noticed. His literally popped up right as I was saying something, and it totally threw off what I was trying to say. Darn it. But yes. If you would like to hear more of this, simply let me know. I mean, we've been going for 44 minutes now. I know some of you wound up missing the first chapter. So, let's see. Reread the first chapter. Perhaps I will in a later episode, but would you like one more chapter for tonight, or should we go ahead and wrap it up for now? 7th squad car just went by. In reverse. I have never tried to read something in reverse, so I don't know how the heck that would sound. I actually remember one time that we saw a high-speed chase, if you can even call it that, out here where I live. We live on dirt roads, and the vehicle that the police were chasing was actually hauling a trailer of all things, and they couldn't catch him. There was like 3 sheriff cars following him, and they still couldn't catch the guy. It was hilarious. Ever do raccoon hunting? Yes, actually, I have. It was a totally impromptu moment, but yes, I did actually do some raccoon hunting once. It's when we were actually out on our cousin's farmland. We spotted them in a big pile of wood. Actually, it was a big trash pile. It was mostly a bunch of trees that they had cut down but had other things in it. And the raccoons were actually sleeping and, for the most part, living in the big trash pile. My cousin saw them and immediately told me, "Shoot the damn things! Those things destroy our crops!" So, there we go. Please tell me more. I personally prefer elk or wild boar. Ah, there's actually a chapter in here talking about hunting wild boar. Trash pandas. Raccoons are cute and evil. Jeez, how many cars do they need to stop these 2 guys? Is it the two guys from Fast and Furious? Because if that's the case, I can see why they might need quite a few to stop them. So, I gladly toast everyone who is here tonight. One of those guys crashed already. Yes, I am fully aware of the fact that Paul Walker is no longer with us. He was an amazing actor, but honestly, they really have overdone Fast and Furious. The series has just gotten totally out of control, in my opinion. But we are completely getting off track here. Trash pandas here carry rabies, and the squirrels carry the plague. That's lovely. We have prairie dogs that carry the plague here in Colorado, in my area at least. Rabies, I'm not sure about. Was he really an amazing actor? In my opinion, he was. I enjoy most of the Fast and Furious movies, and honestly, I'm not sure what other movies he's been in. I have a brief selection of movies that I enjoy watching, but I don't really go out there and get a whole bunch of other movies to watch. You know, people still give me crap about the fact that I haven't seen The Fifth Element yet. I haven't seen any of the Godfather movies. We're having a rabies outbreak in Colorado Springs. That's definitely not good. Something went down bad down the interstate, and I've got to drive to get back to Memphis from Lakeland. Varsity Blues. I don't think I've ever seen that one. Wait a minute. Was Paul Walker in The Matrix, or was that someone else? I've only ever seen the first Matrix, and I've only seen it once, but the main character, in my opinion at least, looked a little bit like Paul Walker. At least at the time, that's what I thought. It's literally been years, so I honestly can't remember. We've had 25 confirmed cases of rabies this year already. Wow. Oh, that was Keanu Reeves. Okay. I am terrible with names. You know, I'm going to put that out there right now. I am horrible with names. So, I apologize. So, getting back to story time. It is pronounced canoe. So his name is Keanu Reeves. And why the heck did I think you just spelled profound instead of pronounced? It's a profound canoe. It circulates down the river of life, pondering those things that which we cannot fully understand of our own minuscule and incompetent minds. Well, that was fun. Have I ever actually gone canoeing? No, I have not. It sounds like fun. I would like to, but I actually have not. Now, children, no fighting on my channel. Thank you very much. I pronounce his name as Canoe, since that is how Bill S. Preston and Thed Theodore Logan would. Okay. Have I ever watched Parks and Rec? No. We don't have cable, so any of those shows that are like on HBO or Cinemax, that's probably the wrong channel, or any of those kinds of channels, we do not get here. So any of those shows that are on there, no. I do have Netflix, but honestly, I don't use it that much. Bread. What's bread got to do with anything, darling? I'm totally confused of what you're going on about. Ron Swanson. Okay. I was about to say, if you want to piss off anybody in regards to bread, you simply need to say that to Markiplier on one of his live streams. I apologize, that was probably pretty gross. Well, since one of you mentioned that you enjoy boar hunting. Why don't we go ahead and have our last chapter tonight as Wild Boar? This is one of my personal favorite chapters out of this book as well, actually. So, again, if you have not gotten yourself a beverage yet, please refresh it. Cheers to everyone out there. Wild boar is tasty like funky bacon and maple. Mmm. I love maple bacon, so that sounds really good. I just noticed my hair. At the right angle, it almost looks kind of like Wolverine's hair. I've even got... Are we back? We're back. Okay. Let me see. Okay. Lost some power, but I'm not surprised. Wolverine Master 619. Okay. Okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and tell you this story before I actually read this chapter. Because now that you mentioned that, that reminded me of one of my own personal hunting stories. So, me and my buddy, Lord Mechanicus... Let's bub. Nice. So for any of you who have watched my other channel, Bowmaster 619, I have a pal who on here on YouTube is called Lord Mechanicus. He has joined me in a few of my spirit tasting videos. And me and him actually went hunting one year up at a place that was originally called Reinecker Ridge, or now it's called the James Mark Jones Wild Game Preserve. Either way, beautiful country, a lot of hiking, you definitely have to be in shape for it. But we went up there, and the way landscape is set up is where you park, there is a hill that goes up from that area, and then once you get down there, there is an open field of probably about 2 miles, and then the first ridge, and then inside there, there's a small valley, and then the main ridge comes up behind that. And these ridges are enormous. You know, it takes a hell of a long time to hike up these things. But me and Curly went up there with a few of our other hunting partners. And me and him were paired up together, and everyone else was a little further along the ridge. We all had our own walkie-talkies and stuff so we could stay in contact. But me and him were sitting there on the ridge, and the wind started blowing into our faces, coming from... So, the way we're sitting, the wind was coming from this direction and blowing towards us. I suddenly got a whiff of something that smelled a little bit musky. Now, I have hunted and gutted out deer before, so I know exactly what they smell like. And I leaned over to Curly and I said, "Can you smell that, dude?" Like, smell what? "I smell something kind of musky. You know, kind of earthy, musky. I'm not really sure how to describe it." It's like, "No, but..." "Ooh, did you hear that?" Like, "No, what'd you hear?" "Heard like a ooh, ooh, ooh kind of sound." And sure enough, about 5 minutes after that little exchange, we saw a small herd of deer on the opposite ridge walking directly in front of us. So essentially, we wound up working as a team there, where he could actually hear the deer, and for whatever odd reason, I could actually smell the deer before they showed up. So you saying Wolverine Master actually reminded me of that, so I just wanted to go ahead and tell that story briefly before we move on to this. But strong sense of smell is something I've always had, and honestly, I'm very happy for it. It's come in handy quite a bit. So, enough of the personal stories. Let's go ahead and move on with the last chapter of this book before we wrap it up for the evening. Hunting like a wild pack. Pretty much. All we needed was my buddy Monkey there, and we would have definitely had some deer because he is a freaking dead shot with his Mosin Nagant. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a bad shot. I'm simply saying that when he has that thing actually sighted into the right distance, he's an incredibly good shot with that rifle. Plus, it's a Mosin Nagant. It's a good rifle to begin with. Now, on to wild boar. I had always wanted to hunt wild boar, but I had never been able to find the time in my hectic business schedule to manage to squeeze a trip in. Then, early one morning, near the end of summer, a friend of mine, Paul Steiner, stopped in to see me. He said, "How would you like to go hunting wild boar?" I said, "Boy, would I, but I can't get the time away for 2 or 3 weeks it would take to go down south to get one." Paul said, "I don't mean going down south to Georgia or somewhere. I mean to the Tioga Wild Game Preserve in Pennsylvania." I thought to myself, why not? I had heard of this hunting preserve, but had never gotten any information on it. Paul told me that it was a large place, close to 1,000 acres in size, and had all variety of exotic game. It was Louis County, Pennsylvania, about an hour's drive from where I was living at the time in Elmira, New York. I told Paul I was interested, and with another friend, Ron Saxton, we decided to make arrangements for a September hunt. I called the Tioga Preserve and talked with Pete Gee. G. I'm not sure how to pronounce this last name. I never have. It's spelled Gee. Our friend Kitty has a Mosin. Awesome. I have been to Elmira. Very cool. Let's see. I called the Tioga Preserve and talked with Pete Gee, the owner. He seemed like a very pleasant fellow over the phone, and the arrangements were quickly made. The three of us had a scheduled hunt for the middle weekend in September. To say I was excited would be an understatement. I quivered with anticipation. The arrangements made, we planned to meet at Ron's mobile home Friday, and have a leisurely drive up to the preserve. Pete Gee told me that they would be expecting us for supper, and the bunk rooms would be ready for us. As we were driving up the country dirt road to the farmhouse, we could see all manner of various species of exotic wild game. Fields bordered our road, and behind these could be seen the woods of oak, maple, and ash, their leaves taking on the autumn hues which makes this area so beautiful in the fall. Further up the road, we encountered a small herd of buffalo. I began to feel the excitement mounting within me as we drew closer to our destination. We arrived at the farmhouse type lodge in the late afternoon. Pete welcomed us warmly and said that supper was waiting for us. We feasted on buffalo ribs and fixins. During our meal, we discussed the following. Oh! Are we back? During our meal, we discussed the following day's hunt. We elected to take a guide. The area we would be hunting would be unfamiliar to us. Pete told us the boar were dangerous and that they buzzed through the alders and the underbrush like hornets moving around a nest. He said they move with surprising speed and agility for their size. We were told that many of the boars weigh over 200 pounds and that some went as high as 300 pounds. We also were warned to keep a tree in reach to be quick and sure, because 300 pounds of boar stung by an arrow or spooked by a near miss can do a lot of damage with teeth, tusks, and hooves. Yeah. We retired early to our bunk room and talked over the following day's hunt. I would be using my 106-pound longbow and Howard Hill broadheads mounted on wooden arrows. My friends were using compound bows and aluminum arrows tipped with razor blade type broadheads. I put the finishing touches on my broadheads with a 6-inch mill file. I prefer a rough, sharp, serrated edge as the jagged cut it makes bleeds more profusely. After our preparations, we all hit the sack. Bright and early the next morning we were up and about. Breakfast was waiting for us, and we arrived in the dining room. We had a filling meal of wild boar sausage, eggs, and pancakes, all washed down with lots of hot, strong coffee. That sounds absolutely delicious. After eating, we got our gear and, with our guide, headed over the hill for the east gate entrance leading into the preserve. When we arrived at the gate, the guide gave us our instructions. He would drop each one of us off at a good spot, and we would either still hunt or move around and stalk our prey. I was the first one to be dropped off, and as my friends and guide disappeared from sight, I had a slight ominous feeling come over me. I visually picked out a tree that I felt I could climb easily if necessity demanded. I could hear a certain amount of animal activity around me, but was as yet unable to see any signs of wildlife. The terrain was extremely stony, and the hooves of the wild boar as they ran over the ground created a clattering sound that could be heard from some distance in the quiet forest. The spot where I was standing was part way up a steep hill. Just below me, on the ground, leveled off to a flat bench, just within shooting distance. The area was covered with heavy second growth, and the brush made it difficult to see any distance. There was very little ground vegetation, leading me to think that it was either an area the wild boar used for feeding, or the sunlight didn't penetrate the overhead canopy on this side of the hill. Suddenly, I was startled from my reverie to hear a clattering noise approaching. A black specter materialized through the trees below me. Peering with strained eyes, bow and arrow ready, I began to make out the shape of a huge boar. He was about 50 yards away, and I estimated him to be close to 300 pounds. He stopped in a small clearing, giving me the opportunity for a long, quick shot. Pulling up, I let the arrow fly and saw sparks erupt just behind the boar. I figured I'd overshot because of the downhill grade. The animal turned and moved a few feet, and I released my second shot. This one also hit a rock, throwing sparks and making quite a noise. This was just too much for the big boar, and so, like a wraith, he quickly disappeared from sight. A few seconds later, I heard a rifle shot and figured one of the gun hunters had gotten a shot at him. My heart was still pounding, my mouth was dry, and my hands felt clammy. I looked around to reassure myself that the black apparition I had seen wasn't sneaking up on me. After a few minutes, I began to settle down and regained my composure. I'd been hearing a lot of stone rattling uphill from where I was, so I decided to do a little quiet stalking. Moving very slowly through the dense woods, and making as little noise as the terrain would permit, I finally arrived at the top of the hill. Looking around, I came across a well-used trail showing plenty of fresh sign of small hooves. I decided this had to be a trail the boar were using. I decided to get just off the trail and wait. Once again, I picked out a tree I could rapidly climb. I'd only been standing there quietly for about an hour when I began to hear the approaching sound of clattering stones. I knew it was a hoofed game of some kind and hoped it was a boar rather than some type of deer, as I had only secured a boar permit. As the noise grew louder and closer, my tremors of excitement grew more intense. Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, there stood 7 wild boar. I guessed them to be about 20 yards away. They were colored in various patterns of black and off-white, with some being totally black. They had spotted me and were milling around confused, waiting for the boar leader to decide which way to go. A large black standing broadside to me finally grunted a guttural sound, awakening me from my mesmerized trance. Years of training came into play. The 106-pound longbow sprang into action as if it had a life of its own. My glove hand touched my anchor, and the heavy 650-grain arrow tore across the distance, separating me from the big black in less than the twinkling of an eye. I saw the red feathers appear as if by magic on its right shoulder, and knew he was mortally wounded. With a high-pitched squealing, he tore off down the hill. The other boar disappeared as rapidly in the opposite direction. I started down the hill after the wounded boar, moving very slowly and cautiously, trying to see as far ahead as I could. Visibility was limited to about 40 or 50 yards by the heavy thickets. I knew if he should charge me, I'd be lucky to get a shot off before he'd be upon me. When I got to the bottom of the hill, I came across blood sign and knew I was heading in the right direction. I began to follow the blood, and after a few minutes, I got quick glimpses of him through the heavy brush. He was about 50 yards ahead and moving slowly away from me. Sensing my presence behind him, he disappeared from sight. I arrived at the point where I had last seen him and noted that the blood trail took a turn south for a clearing up ahead. I continued moving slowly, scanning the area up ahead carefully. Reaching the open area, I saw I was standing on one of the dirt roads that traverse the preserve. All of a sudden, from the thick undergrowth to my left appeared my wounded pig. He stopped about 30 yards away in the middle of the forest. As it flew harmlessly by, I mentally kicked myself for shooting too fast. The boar, with a high-pitched squeal, headed into the... I could see the red feathers of my arrow protruding from his right shoulder. Pulling the heavy bow back, I sent a well-aimed arrow, striking him only inches away first. With a grunt of pain, he disappeared in a flash. I thought, what stamina these boar have! All at once, from my left, I heard, "Good shot! He won't go far now!" Our guide had been watching the exciting drama that had taken place and was quite impressed by the two arrows that were only inches apart in the wild boar's shoulder. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple more pictures here. The first one is 3 of the wild boar taken on the hunt, and the next one is Dick Palmer with his black boar, saying, "I was amazed at the eating quality of this boar. I ate the whole thing." And I must say, that is quite an impressive boar he's got there for sure. We both started following the now very heavy blood trail. We came upon both arrows, one intact and the other in 3 pieces. Once again, I marveled at how a creature could extricate 2 arrows penetrating both shoulders. The willpower and tenacity of the big black boar just amazed me. Starting down another small hill, I saw him lying on his side near the bottom of the slope. We approached with caution, and seeing that he was dead, I set down my hunting tackle. I could see he was large, and the guide estimated his weight at around 200 pounds. We quickly field dressed him and dragged him back to the east gate where we left him. We then headed uphill to see how many... Okay, my eyes are starting to get a little bit tired here. When we headed uphill... Wow! Don't worry, chapter's almost done. We then headed uphill to see how my companions were doing. We ran into Paul dragging his wild boar downhill. He had shot a large grizzled-looking black and tan. He said it had taken him 2 shots, one going through the ribcage and the other completely through the hindquarters. We left Paul to drag his boar back to the gate and once again headed uphill to where we knew Ron to be. We found Ron tracking a wounded boar. He had got in a shot in the rear quarters of a small one. The animal was moving slowly ahead of Ron when it suddenly stopped, allowing him to shoot again. This time, the arrow struck the animal in the side, getting good penetration. Squealing and stumbling on the stony ground, the boar started downhill, with Ron right behind. We followed so as not to miss any of the action. Finally, both participants in the struggle stopped, and we were able to observe Ron deliver the coup de grace. We returned triumphant back to the farmhouse, where we took pictures and had our game processed for transportation home. It was a trip I'd always remember because of the excitement engendered by the game we were hunting. And that is it for tonight. Let me go ahead and reread through some of these comments here. Mark Twain wrote quite a few of his novels in Elmira, including Huck Finn. That's actually really cool. Hornets terrify me. Hornets and wasps terrify me. I wouldn't know if I never went tear. Alright, your beautiful voice is like ASMR and making me feel sleepy. Good night, all you lovely people. Good night, Aaron. I know I probably missed actually saying that to you directly, so I do apologize. Thank you very much for joining. Excuse me. Thank you very much for joining us all tonight. Hello, Carrie Cameron. Thank you, Tessa. So, that is it for tonight. If you would like to hear more out of this book in the future, simply let me know down in the comments below. If there are any other books you would like to hear, I have quite an impressive selection arrayed at my house. I can also get books from the library and whatnot. Any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. simply let me know again down in the comments below. I apologize for repeating myself. I'm starting to get a little bit tired here. Until next time, thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us for story time. I hope you all enjoyed listening. Anything but The Great Gatsby. You're not going to catch me reading The Great Gatsby, that's for sure. And I am not going to read The Grapes of Wrath, either. Ugh, I could not stand that book. Okay, bringing it down again. Thank you very much for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed story time tonight. Next time, perhaps we will either read a few more chapters out of Bow and Arrow Adventures, or maybe I'll bring an entirely new book up. Simply let me know. Until next time, this is Bowmaster619 out. Drive safe, stay safe, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Take care.